The involuntary act of offering an unearned apology within a highly competitive social or corporate hierarchy is never a demonstration of elevated moral maturity or modern politeness. It is a catastrophic biological leak of power that mathematically assigns an individual to the absolute bottom of the dominance hierarchy. Human society has been carefully and maliciously engineered to reward extreme compliance, programming the masses to believe that absorbing the blame for uncomfortable situations is a virtuous display of emotional intelligence and interpersonal grace. In reality, predators operating at the highest levels of these environments perfectly understand that an unprovoked apology is a highly visible trauma response, immediately signaling that the individual's central nervous system is completely terrified of unresolved conflict. Elite operators utilize a highly classified psychological framework to protect their internal energy vaults, strictly forbidding their verbal delivery of apologies for circumstances that fall entirely outside of their logical control. This specific, impenetrable mental armor is currently being heavily suppressed by algorithms designed to keep high-performing individuals docile, overly accommodating, and easily manageable by emotional parasites who feed on their constant submission. Failing to completely decode this specific behavioral exploit today mathematically guarantees a lifetime of psychological slavery, where the individual voluntarily bleeds their valuable social status just to maintain a fraudulent sense of peace in the room. By the exact conclusion of this comprehensive clinical breakdown, the elite blueprint for completely eradicating the submissive apology will be entirely exposed, providing the precise tools required to command absolute respect without ever retreating. Pay absolute attention to the underlying evolutionary mechanics revealed in the following minutes, because the fundamental perception of human courtesy, conflict resolution, and social manipulation is about to be shattered completely and irreversibly. Every single interaction between human beings operates as a continuous, unforgiving calculation of power, where personal leverage is either actively accumulated through strict emotional discipline or silently surrendered through unnecessary verbal justification. High-performing professionals consistently fall into the devastating trap of apologizing when someone else bumps into them, when a meeting starts late due to another person's incompetence, or when a covert narcissist intentionally manufactures an awkward silence. The individual incorrectly assumes that stepping forward to take the blame diffuses the tension and proves they are the bigger, more enlightened person, completely ignoring the brutal mathematical reality of how status is truly distributed. The predator sitting across the table does not perceive a kind, empathetic team player. They clearly register a terrified, highly compliant biological puppet who is willing to sacrifice their own foundational self-respect simply to avoid a momentary feeling of social friction. Every single time the word "sorry" escapes the lips without genuine, logical justification, the individual actively drains their own perceived value directly into the floor, voluntarily handing the remote control of their reality over to an emotional parasite. The target is actively funding the dominance of the covert manipulator, using their own dignity as the heavy currency, solidifying their permanent position as an obedient host whose boundaries can be freely violated without any fear of consequence or retaliation. The biological cost of fake guilt. The dark psychology underlying the biological cost of carrying fake guilt reveals that the human brain's natural response to social friction is fundamentally flawed when attempting to navigate modern, high-stakes competitive environments. Thousands of years ago, the amygdala developed a highly sensitive alarm system that equated any form of tribal disapproval with literal physical death, prompting early humans to immediately apologize and submit to dominant figures just to avoid being exiled into the wilderness. Today, however, that exact same outdated evolutionary glitch is ruthlessly hijacked by sophisticated covert sociopaths who intentionally create heavy, uncomfortable environments to trigger that primal panic within the nervous systems of their highly capable peers. When a manipulator drops a passive-aggressive remark or acts entirely unapproachable, the target's limbic system instantly short-circuits, flooding their bloodstream with cortisol and demanding an immediate, frantic resolution to the crushing internal terror. To alleviate this severe biological inflammation, the individual desperately offers an apology, falsely believing that taking the blame will finally restore the environment to a perceived state of emotional safety and psychological equilibrium. This constant suppression of natural, kinetic defensive energy exacts a catastrophic metabolic toll on the human body, aggressively rotting the individual's self-esteem from the core outward as they continuously swallow their genuine thoughts to accommodate a parasite. Because the deep, justified anger associated with having one's boundaries tested is repeatedly pushed down and denied a physical outlet, the trapped emotional energy eventually turns completely toxic, breeding a heavy, silent resentment toward the entire social circle. The target begins to secretly despise their own reflection, experiencing severe brain fog and chronic physical exhaustion for absolutely no logical reason, simply because their central nervous system is trapped in an endless, exhausting cycle of survival mode. Apologizing to soothe a predator's manufactured anger is never a sustainable or healthy strategy. It is a profound form of self-inflicted psychological harm, where the victim pays for the temporary comfort of their abuser using their own valuable life force. How manipulators manufacture your apologies. Covert manipulators operating within elite corporate and social frameworks do not extract unearned apologies by sheer accident. They execute a highly systematic, predatory protocol specifically designed to test the structural integrity of their peers' mental boundaries. These emotional parasites operate on a severe, chronic internal energy deficit, requiring a constant daily harvest of external validation and submission to sustain their incredibly fragile, deeply fractured narcissistic egos. To acquire this necessary fuel, the predator will intentionally drop microscopic social infractions into the environment, purposely misunderstanding a clear instruction or delivering a highly disrespectful insult disguised poorly as a casual joke, and then meticulously watch the reaction. Defending one's territory with cold, unblinking authority immediately forces the manipulator to retreat, but rushing forward to apologize for the misunderstanding registers instantly as absolute biological submission and a complete lack of internal spine. Once the predator mathematically confirms that the target's boundaries are entirely hollow, they establish a permanent psychological pipeline, constantly manufacturing new scenarios where the highly capable individual is forced to apologize just to keep the peace. The manipulator will utilize the silent treatment as a form of calculated psychological torture, completely withdrawing their warmth and approval until the frantic, terrified target breaks under the pressure and begs for forgiveness for a crime they never committed. The victim is actively training the covert narcissist to continuously abuse them, demonstrating with clinical precision that their manipulation tactics work flawlessly and that the target is far too terrified of isolation to ever establish genuine consequences. This deeply toxic dynamic relies exclusively on the target's desperate desire to be universally liked and perceived as accommodating, transforming them into a highly useful tool that can be completely drained of resources without ever raising an alarm. By constantly bending reality to absorb the manufactured blame, the individual proves to the entire room that their personal sovereignty does not actually exist, making it absolutely critical to completely eradicate this weak behavioral pattern immediately. Pause the video and deeply internalize the gravity of the behavioral trap currently being exposed, as your desperate biological need to apologize is actively destroying your potential for future success at this exact moment. If you fail to completely decode this specific psychological exploit within the next 60 seconds, your sovereign identity will be permanently erased by manipulators who already mathematically calculate your severe weakness. The narrow window of opportunity to protect your nervous system and establish an unbreakable mental framework is shutting right now, making it absolutely critical that you absorb this clinical data without a single distraction. The dark psychology of psychological submission. The brutal reality of this complex behavioral dynamic is that offering an apology to diffuse social tension is the ultimate, undeniable confirmation of absolute psychological submission to the dominant predator in the room. People pleasers constantly delude themselves into believing that taking the blame demonstrates a highly evolved spiritual nature, completely ignoring the painful fact that they are merely reacting to their own inability to tolerate the heavy weight of another person's disappointment. True respect within any competitive hierarchy is entirely predicated on an individual's capacity to firmly hold their ground under intense pressure, meaning that anyone who constantly folds their hand to avoid friction is mathematically assigned a baseline value of 0. The surrounding audience absorbs this behavioral data instantaneously, recognizing that the individual who constantly says sorry stands for absolutely nothing concrete viewing their entire personality as a cheap, highly theatrical performance designed specifically to evade conflict. This relentless, cowardly desire to avoid arguments guarantees a permanent position at the absolute bottom of the social ladder, where the individual is systematically overlooked for promotions, leadership roles, and basic human dignity. The covert narcissist does not harbor any genuine love, appreciation, or gratitude for the target's constant apologies. They are exclusively addicted to the profound sense of power they experience when forcing a stronger, more capable human being to verbally kneel before them. Every single unearned apology acts as a massive, open invitation for further psychological consumption, clearly broadcasting a signal to the dominant players that exploiting this person's finite time and emotional bandwidth carries absolutely zero risk of retaliation. Pretending that constant submission will eventually earn true loyalty from an emotional parasite is a highly destructive illusion designed to keep victims trapped in a completely rigged game where their energy is continuously extracted without consequence. The individual must brutally confront the reality that their politeness is merely a sophisticated defense mechanism hiding deep biological terror. And addressing this painful truth is absolutely mandatory for reclaiming genuine sovereignty over their own life. Why elite operators never take the blame. The elite top 1% function on an entirely different neurological frequency, possessing a highly classified mental defense system that strictly forbids the absorption of unearned guilt or the delivery of a submissive apology. These sovereign operators have ruthlessly purged the pathetic, biological need for external validation from their nervous systems, understanding perfectly that taking the blame for another person's chaos is the absolute fastest route to permanently losing all psychological leverage. When covert manipulators inevitably attempt their calculated public dominance tests by shifting the blame or creating heavy, awkward tension, the elite operator does not panic, flinch, or rush to fix the uncomfortable friction with a nervous "I'm sorry." Instead, they execute a terrifying, unblinking cold stillness with absolute mathematical precision, allowing the heavy, uncomfortable silence to hang thickly in the air and forcing the predator to suffocate entirely within their own manufactured disrespect. Breaking the silence first guarantees losing the power dynamic, which is precisely why elite operators heavily project boring, sovereign, absolute cold indifference, watching the manipulator's highly active brain severely short-circuit in real time. The sociopath fully expected a weak, compliant apology and an eager attempt to smooth over the emotional friction. But instead, their toxic manipulation tactics collided violently with an unbreakable concrete wall of pure, clinical emotional discipline. Firm boundaries are never apologized for by the truly elite, and taking the blame to protect an emotional terrorist's fragile ego simply does not happen under any circumstances, allowing these operators to command entire environments effortlessly by strictly dictating the exact terms of engagement and refusing to be swayed by biological distress signals or artificial guilt. The elite demonstrate that holding psychological leverage is infinitely more valuable than being perceived as universally accommodating. Playing the dark villain and being deeply misunderstood by emotionally weak fools is entirely comfortable for those who hold true power, because they possess the clinical understanding that free emotional energy cannot be extracted from a solid stone. You are standing at the absolute edge of a psychological paradigm shift, and the behavioral armor being handed to you today is the absolute only mechanism capable of protecting your life force from complete extraction by emotional parasites. If you close this video before mastering this final execution step, you will wake up tomorrow as obedient prey, permanently volunteering to remain a pathetic social puppet who bleeds status every single time they open their mouth. The elite guard this specific dark psychology secret incredibly ruthlessly to maintain their absolute dominance over the masses. So do not miss the following clinical instructions if you ever intend to reclaim your psychological leverage, reclaiming your absolute social power. The agonizing era of existing as a highly compliant, apologetic biological host ends the exact moment an individual decides that reclaiming their deep respect requires ruthless, immediate physical execution rather than passive, theoretical understanding of human behavior. The nervous, accommodating urge to step forward and absorb the blame for circumstances beyond your logical control must be permanently deleted from your behavioral repertoire today, effectively terminating the constant, pathetic desire to act as the room's emotional shock absorber. When a blatant, theatrical attempt to shift blame is directed at you in a high-stakes competitive setting, you must mentally step aside and allow the heavy social tension to crash loudly onto the floor, absolutely refusing to fix the awkwardness yourself. By looking directly at the manipulator with completely cold, dead eyes and projecting the quiet, calculating stillness of an apex predator, you instantly reverse the psychological attack and reclaim your sovereign authority over the environment without uttering a single syllable. You must accept the brutal biological reality that reclaiming your sovereign power and withholding your apologies will inevitably cause massive, violent anger among your social circle, prompting emotional parasites to throw severe, toxic tantrums. You will be loudly accused of being arrogant, incredibly stubborn, and impossible to work with, and your complete lack of emotional reaction will be desperately weaponized by those who previously benefited from your severe lack of boundaries. However, you must let them scream wildly and thrash hysterically in the dark room, because their deep, helpless frustration on the cold floor is the absolute clinical proof that your new mental armor works flawlessly, demonstrating you no longer require their permission to exist. The highly toxic, overly apologetic identity is completely dead, replaced today by a massive, impenetrable concrete wall that protects your internal energy vault fiercely from anyone attempting to extract your highly valuable life force using fake guilt. Subscribe and hit the bell immediately to join the ranks of the truly armed elite operators, mastering the heavy power of silence to become utterly untouchable in any highly toxic social environment and dominating the hierarchy forever. Do not wait for broken, manipulative people to suddenly take accountability for their own actions. Evolve your own mind today, protect your internal energy vault at all costs, and permanently revoke the unearned power of sociopaths by never saying sorry again.